Gordon, we were talking this morning, and you said you got an article coming out, kind of about what we were talking about earlier, about kind of these old time bucks and how the habitat may have had some effects on some of these bucks. Could you touch on that a little bit? I thought that was real interesting.
Yeah, the next issue of North American Whitetail is coming out as kind of a habitat theme issue, as we typically do this time of year, because everybody's, deer season's closed and people are starting to think about next year. And a lot of people think about food plots and all these different things, hinge cutting and all the stuff that people do, right? So I said, well, let's take a look back at some of these truly legendary bucks. And the Breen buck, the Jordan buck, the hole in the horn, the Mel Johnson buck, like you talked about, but even the general sheds out of Nebraska, the world record typical sheds, the Dale Austin buck from the early 60s in Nebraska, for till Mike Beatty came along in 2000, that was the undisputed non-typical world record with a bow. And all those deer legends, and people say, well, gee, those all were killed, or in the case of hole in the horn, those all lived. It probably got hit by a train, but nonetheless, those deer were from long, long ago, way before anybody was managing habitat. So that just shows what pristine natural habitat can grow. Now, I'd be the last one to say that nature is wrong. However, I would also tell you that all of those deer were killed in altered habitats. When Mel Johnson kills this deer in a bean field, that's different from saying that was prairie grass. Okay, he kills a 212, a 212 gross or whatever that deer was, 204 and 4/8 net, in a lush bean field in the middle of a lush part of the world like central Nebraska, central Illinois. Then you're saying, well, gee, that's kind of a giant food plot, and he wasn't the only one. There were food plots there all around. They just didn't call them that. Hole in the horn, he got found dead between a train track and the Arsenal fence in Northeast Ohio after they'd already chopped up all that country for 150 years and made it into small farms. It wasn't native woods like it was in 1800 when the first surveyors came through there. The same with the Jordan buck. I've walked the Jordan buck trail in northwestern Wisconsin, which you can do, and the public can go walk that trail. It's like a mile down through an old railroad track where Jordan walked when he shot the deer. Again, on the assumption, Dan, that this is his deer, right? I mean, we're just assuming that, but I've walked through there.
Is that a marked trail that's that people publicly walk?
Yeah, it's called
I've never heard of that.
It's called the Jordan Buck Heritage Hike, is what it's called, and it's along the old Gandy Dancer Trail leading up toward the river, toward the Yellow River up into Danbury in Burnett County. So it's not that far out of the Twin Cities. It's it's not.
Me.
Yeah, it's a cool thing to go walk it and to imagine, hey, if I were James Jordan with my little 25-20 carbine in 1914 on November 20th, walking through the snow, and I hear a train whistle and the buck jumps up and I shoot him, and then I keep shooting at him and he finally falls dead in the river. Then I lose him. Then we go drag him out of the river, and then the taxidermist loses him for 50 years, and I'm an old man and I say, this is my buck. I've got the world record. What a story, right? But I mean, that just to talk about the habitat part of it is just like that country was all cut over even before 1914. That country was not virgin at the time. 1918 in northern Minnesota, where the Breen buck was killed near Bemidji, that country had been cut over for 30, 40, 50 years, some of it. So that was not walking into the true untouched wilderness and killing these dinosaur-sized megabucks, okay? All these deer were products of farming or logging or something that altered the habitat. It's just that we did not call it what we do today. Now it's timber stand improvement, right? If you want to adjust your woods for better deer carrying capacity or winter food or cover and stuff like that, well, now, okay, we call it something. But back then they were just logging. Okay, back then they were just farming. They weren't food plotting. They were just farming, and they grew mega giant deer. So that's not to say nature couldn't have done that on her own, but when we look at those specific examples, I think we find time and again that there was a severely altered habitat in which those deer were killed. So I just took a look at that and try to make sense of it, because I don't think anybody had ever done that before on those particular deer in those particular areas. So I just felt like that would help people to understand that, virgin, quote unquote, virgin woods is not always going to be the best place to hunt.
That brings up a good point about something else real similar. I had a conversation years and years ago with an outfitter. He's long since died, but he used to be a good friend of mine, and I'd meet him at all the deer shows when I used to go. And he'd be in a booth next to me, and we'd talk. And he was always trying to get me to go up by him. And he told me, Dan, if you want to come up by me and hunt, ask me first. I'll let you know what year. He says, because we don't say this to the general public because we'll lose clients. But when we have a mild winter, the next year our rack sizes are 20% bigger. Mm-hmm. And he says statistically every time. So you see something with those mild winters in places that maybe don't have as much food or that are further north?
Well, that's a good question, because old timers in South Texas, and that's a totally different place from where you're talking about, but old timers in South Texas, and that country is super dry sometimes, and it's super hot too, and it's that way for months on end. And you say that, how do deer make a living here? Even in a good year, it's still kind of semi-desert, but the old timers would tell you the best racks are going to be in the drought years. Now, I don't know whether those were the best racks, or whether the deer were that much more huntable when they had less food, and thus they ended up killing bigger deer. I'm not sure, they were saying deer for deer, that a deer is going to be bigger without food or without water. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. But it also, right, in some of those places, the browse that does exist gets concentrated in terms of its nutritional value, as opposed to places, cattlemen would tell you on the Gulf Coast. When my parents moved up in the Gulf Coast running cattle and moved 200 miles inland in Texas 60 years ago, they found out real quick that even though there wasn't as much grass in the Texas Hill Country, they said it was, quote, stronger grass. It wasn't all water like some of the grass pastures were down on the Gulf Coast, where it was raining all the time and high humidity. And so it wasn't a quantity thing. There was so much more quality browse. So I'm not sure that doesn't factor in sometimes, but I would absolutely tell you that when deer get stressed, it can't help. I mean, it really, if you think about winter stress, particularly these days, when you've had EHD die-offs and stuff, and you've got wolves and you've got all kind of stuff going on that we may not even know about. CWD to me is kind of a joke. I don't even consider that a factor, but EHD is a factor. And if you get your deer numbers knocked way down, but then you get a mild winter, well, then the deer that are left obviously have got tremendous amount of food, and it may be fewer deer, but you may also have bigger top end. So I think every place and every situation is unique. I don't think we can absolutely say, okay, well, this is how it is, period, everywhere. But I would say that if your deer have serious winter stress, it cannot help the next year's rack. It's just no way.
Kind of going back to what we were talking about how habitat affected deer back in the day, is something else they had going for them way back then was the deer had way more habitat than they do now. And probably because of that factor, they had less pressure, which typically less stress produces, better deer in it too, you've heard 100 times people's hunting spots getting turned into housing addition.
Yeah, I've hunted some of those places too, and it's a sickening thing to have hunted a place and to know it's good, and then to come back and look at it turned into, ranchettes or whatever, and say it'll never, ever, you'll never hunt it again. I mean, that's whether it's a good place or not, you feel that way. But when it's a really good place, and some of those places like that it is just a nauseating thought. Nope. I don't even drive by those places anymore, because I just have bad, I want to have good feelings about them because they were great places to hunt. But sometimes it's just too hard to look out across there and look at rooftops, Yep.
Yeah. I had it happen to me this year. I can look out my window of my house and see where I shot my buck in Indiana this year. And about a month ago, I noticed there was a bulldozer out there. And then within a couple of days, they pushed all the trees in, and now it's just a pile of ashes out there. So,
people have to have a place to live, but they don't have to live in the good deer spots, as far as I'm concerned.
Hey, everybody. If you like the channel, make sure you subscribe right here. And if you like the clips, I got 2 more options for you. 2 options right here. Subscribe right here. See you guys.